Hello, everyone, and welcome to Introduction to Project Budgets, our webinar for today. I'm Yvonne Sims, Educational Programming Manager based in Atlanta, and I'm presenting today. And the person on the screen that you see other than me is not necessarily presenting.
I am behind the screen, behind the scenes, but good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
Thank you for hanging out, Lori. And we also have Erin Rushai. I love that you gave me the phonetic pronunciation, who is hanging out as well and will be answering your questions that you ask. And if you don't know Candid, in 2019, Foundation Center and GuideStar got together and became one 501c3 called Candid. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, why it matters. And we help the sector in many ways through our data, but also through tools and trainings like the one we're on today. And we also have partners, and our community partners help us in many ways by having our tools. And we also like them to come on and tell people exactly what they do. So we have two guests today from Sno-isle Libraries, and I will let them speak.
Yeah, thank you, Yvonne, and hello, everyone. Happy to be here today. I'm Katrina Morse, and I am an adult services librarian at Sno-isle Libraries, which is a two-county public library system out in Western Washington. We're in Snohomish and Island counties, and I am located on South Whidbey Island at the Freeland Library. And the Freeland Library is a funding information network site, so we do have free access to Foundation Directory, grants to individuals, and GuideStar. So if you are in the area, please come on down to the Freeland Library and make use of those resources. I'm happy to set up a time to meet with you one-on-one to go over those resources. So please feel free to reach out. We've got my email and the Freeland Library phone number on the screen there. So come by and say hi and use the Funding Information Network at the Freeland Library. And my colleague, Mark Barnett, is here also, and I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Katrina. Yes, my name is Mark. I work at the Marysville branch, which is across the way from Whidbey Island, where Katrina is located. We are in Snohomish County, which has a population of about 850,000 people, and we geographically cover 2,000 square miles. Just like Katrina, I provide one-on-one sessions, and we have the same databases, and we have been a Candid partner for 10 years now. So we've been going strong. And yeah, if you are in the area in Marysville Library or near Marysville, please contact me and we can set up a one-on-one session, or just drop in and we can get to know you and show you how to use the databases. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you. It's always fun to have our partners hang out for a little bit. So let's get to Introduction to Project Budgets. And this is pretty much one of the classes that I think people are really interested in, because when you hear math for some people, it gets a little interesting. So we want to make sure that we've designed this training to introduce just the key elements of a project budget and equip you with some practical skills. So by the end of today's training, you should be able to describe the basic elements of a project budget, estimate a project's expenses and income, and then follow up after the project is funded. So that's pretty much what we're looking for today. So what funders want to see in project budgets? It's fairly simple. It's kind of exactly what you might think. They want your estimate of the true cost of the project. That sounds like a trick or something, but just looking for the true cost and what you're estimating that will be, not really anything much more than that. And then, of course, your anticipated income to meet those costs. So they want to know, well, how much is it going to cost and how much do you already have so that you can get that done. And then obviously you're asking for kind of the rest or part of it. So we want to go over the components of a project budget. And what we'll do is just kind of look at the typical project budget. Each grant maker is different and many have their own budget format, but most grant makers will want to see a one-page summary of your financial projections, breaking down your project's income and expenses, including both direct and indirect costs. They want to see your income. This is your support and your revenue. This is, what's coming in. These costs are usually made up of your grants and your contributions, and that includes all of the grants from independent foundations, from corporations, government grants, donations from individuals, and any other contributions. So everything that's coming in. And then your earned income. And that includes any fees for service, like if you sell tickets or you have memberships or those kinds of things, and then sale of goods. So if you do have like t-shirts or you're doing consulting and you kind of sell those things, those kind of fall under fee for services or sale of goods. And then of course the expenses. So this is the part we tend to think about first, is getting the work done. So we're talking about anything that's used for this project only, right? So that's why they're called direct costs, because we're looking at these expenses that include personnel, non-personnel. Those are the direct costs that you'll be thinking about for this project, but then there's also indirect costs. And that's something we'll talk about everything we'll talk about in a little more detail. But under expenses, those indirect costs, those are your overhead. Those are the things that, we tend to think about, how do you keep your lights on? How do you make sure that you're able to do any work? But we'll talk about that more in detail. So these are the basic components, and let's go through a little bit more about developing the project. Oh, look, it's disappearing. So if you know your project, you can plan your budget, right? It's kind of interesting when you think about who the best person to draft the project budget is. That's a question that we might ask, like, so who is the best person to draft the project budget? And the answer really is the person who knows the project best. It's often a team effort, including the development, fundraising, and program staff. I know for me here at Candid, we are a nonprofit, and I have worked with a couple of our programs that are funded. And for me, because I was the person managing the project, it made sense for me to at least start the budget and say, hey, these are the things we're going to do. We're going to have consultants. I'm working on it this part of the time. This other person who works for Candid is here. I knew the whole scope of it, but then I also had to talk to the person who was raising funds for the project to say, okay, what exactly do I need to have and what do you know? So there is conversation like that. So think of it as something that's probably going to be a team effort depending on how small your nonprofit is. Your budget should be a mirror reflection of your proposal. So the reason I was talking to the people I was talking to is because they were writing the proposal. So my job was to say, okay, this is what it looks like. And her job was to say, okay, this is how we're asking for it financially. And we want to make sure everything you're telling me that's going to happen in this project is reflected in this budget proposal. So everything that is in your proposal should be represented in your budget. And that's, makes sense for the programming person a lot of times, because they just know it so well. And then the other person can help you kind of put it all together. Let's now get into further detail by turning to the expenses side of the budget. And this is the part that we tend to think about anyway. So the first question is, how will you know how much your project is going to cost? Well, if it's a project that you've already implemented, then you have a good idea of how much it costs. But remember, costs go up. So if this is something you do annually or you've done it before, but a bit ago, I know a lot of people are coming back to doing some of the events that they used to do in person. And you have to really consider that costs go up, and particularly for what we've been through in the last few years, costs have really gone up. So be sure to account for inflation and really just account for everything that's going on for us right now. If this is a brand new project, no worries. There's a standard formula to estimate project costs. Ooh. Research 3 estimates by either researching costs on the internet or contacting companies that manufacture the products or provide the services you're looking for. With the project that I was doing, I definitely was looking for consultants, also looking when we had them in person, I was always looking for food, different things like that. So I'd always look at a few different vendors to get a sense of, okay, this is gonna cost somewhere in the, between this and this. So let me estimate, somewhere in that range. And then similar with the consultants, I could see who was charging what and then use those estimates. You also want to collect and document each quote so that you have a record of your cost estimates. We had one big major event, and that I think we needed like tablecloths, just different things like that, where I had to call at least 3 different companies to get a sense. And I'm glad I did, because we got a much better deal, as I was researching. And then choose the estimate that is the most reasonable and appropriate for your project. It doesn't necessarily have to be the lowest one, but the one that makes sense. In our case, I think it ended up being the lowest one, but we did need someone that could deliver at a particular hour, which was, sort of after hours, and then pick it up at a certain time. So we did have to consider those things as well. So just think about what really makes sense for what you're trying to do.
Yvonne, I have a question
Yeah.
related to estimating. Angela
Mhm.
says, when you do research for 3 estimates, do you average the cost or use the largest or the smallest estimate?
Average makes sense, but also what I was just saying is that you want the one that makes the most sense for you. So something might be really expensive and not what you need exactly, and then something could be in the middle and make more sense for what you're looking for. So, skew toward the one that really makes sense for what you're doing, but understand that if someone's really kind of nitpicky, they may want to see, well, how did you come up with that cost? And so that's why you want to have those estimates and sort of a reason behind what you chose. So average sounds good, but just make sure it really makes sense for what you're trying to do. The big point of this a lot of times is not to undersell and not to try to look for discounts or shortcuts, because then you don't get enough money. So if you know what you're doing and you figure things out and you know how you want things to work and you know what works, don't be afraid to say, it's going to cost a little bit of money. It's going to be a little higher. So don't try to shortchange yourself, I would say. Any other questions before I move on?
There's a question, I think you covered this, about how to research an estimate, and I guess it really just depends on what you're estimating the expense of.
Yeah,
So,
online, I made some calls. I think we had somebody that worked in our building and got certain things before, so we asked them questions, so yeah, it's probably a couple of things. Just make sure you document it however you did it. Is that it?
That's it on this topic. Yeah, there's some other things that I know you're going to cover in a little bit. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So estimating personnel costs. So we're starting with personnel costs because those are most likely the largest component of your budget, because it takes the right people to manage and implement a project successfully. This is when I talk to people who have nonprofits and are doing projects and have been doing a lot of things without being paid, I'm kind of like, ooh, you should be paid. And they feel like, no, but that, to pay me a salary would be huge. Yeah, but you're doing the work and you have the expertise and you're putting in the time. So yeah, personnel costs are the biggest cost, and that's okay. That's exactly what should happen. So if you're doing a project, the first thing you're thinking about is who are all the individuals working on the project. So if you have a nice little spreadsheet or whatever it is that you're starting to do, you're thinking first, who works on this project? So not everybody in the nonprofit, depending on how small or big your nonprofit is, but just who works on this project. And again, I'll use the example of the project I worked on here at Candid. Candid has, I don't know, 200 or so employees, but for that project, there were pretty much, I would say, 3 of us that worked directly on it. And because I did a lot of the management of that project, I was probably the person that worked on it the most. And then we had a couple of other people, right? So the first thing you want to do is list the folks by name, by, position. And then you want to know how much time they will dedicate to the project. So in my case, it was pretty high in terms of a percentage, probably 60% of my time or whatever it was. While for our director, back then at our office, it was more like maybe 10% or so. And then for the other person supporting, it was a lot of their job because they were part-time, and most of their part-time work was related to this project. So it was maybe like 90%. But you want to percentage-wise figure out how much time they're spending on this project and then kind of go from there. And then what are the amounts for the salary range, and do the math from there. So for instance, if we had an executive director that was working on the project, and let's just say we're going to go real low here, but let's say that their salary was $60,000 a year, but they spend 10% of their time doing this particular project, then that's $6,000 that you would say that we need to pay the executive director for this work. The program director, same kind of thing. Let's say they make, I don't know, 50,000, and they spend 50% of their time doing this, then that would be 25,000. So you want to start with who, start with how much time, take that percentage of their salary, and then go from there. You also want to add benefits. Really important that in addition to salaries, you include the cost of benefits. For example, if you offer health benefits or disability benefits, you can include a percentage of the employer's contribution for providing those benefits. So kind of go into, and this is why you might need someone from HR or pretty much someone from HR, because you want to get a sense of, well, how much are they contributing? So that same percentage that you're taking from their salary, you will also take from the benefits. If your organization has those, folks, then definitely say, hey, and they may be used to this. If you're doing project budgets a lot and you're in a nonprofit, they may have that ready to go. Like, okay, this is a percentage, this is what you need to do. And examples of benefits that would be included in this fringe benefit rate would be the disability insurance, employer portion of Medicare, Social Security tax, health insurance, life insurance, pension plan, unemployment insurance, and workers' compensation insurance. So this is a good time to, just go off to the HR person and just say, hey, I just need the fringe benefit rate because I don't know what this is, or I'm not sure what it is here at our organization. And when you add that all up, that would give you the personnel total. So these are all the people that work for the nonprofit that will be working on the project, and the percentages of their salary, and then the fringe benefit.
Yvonne, we've got a number of questions about personnel costs, which is always the tricky thing.
Yeah.
One from Will Marie, do you refer to their annual salary separate from the project? I mean, they have a job that is not related to the project or organization, or is this only for people that receive salaries within the organization?
This is only for people that receive salaries. And I'm not sure if the first part of the question.
Yeah, I'm not quite clear on that either. But yeah, this would be, you can't charge them unless they're working for the organization. If they're a consultant or something, then it would just be whatever you're paying them for the project.
Yeah, so you can see on the screen, we're about to talk about consultants, because that a lot of times you're kind of like, how about them? But yes, salaried employees is who we were just talking about when it comes to personnel costs.
Okay, another question. If the organization only has one project, how much of the ED's time can you apportion for the project?
If that's all that is done, I still think you need to think about how much the ED spends on the project, because there may be fundraising that the ED does. There may be speaking engagements. I don't, it's hard to believe, I could be wrong, that it would be 100%, but it may be. So yeah, you're thinking about how much time do I spend on this project? And whatever that number is, then it is what it is. It may be that you only have one or two people so that they spend, all their time on it. But yes, whatever the truth is, that's what it is.
Okay. Another one, I think you gave the formula for calculating the fringe benefit. That's and what is included in fringe benefits. I think
I need to go back for that one. So fringe benefit. Yeah. I'm gonna go back just a little. Fringe benefit rate, and I think it's changed. I don't know if we have okay, I'm sorry, I'll go back, but just what it includes or examples of the benefits that it includes, and you may want to ask HR to make sure, because these are examples. Disability insurance, employer portion of Medicare, Social Security tax, health insurance, life insurance, pension plan contributions, unemployment insurance, workers' compensation insurance. And your organization tends to have a fringe benefit amount that they know how they do fringe. But Lori, did we have that in our FAQs, one of the how to calculate fringe?
I think that was and basically, I'm sorry, I'm looking this up.
Thank you.
It's so for the organization, in other words, you tally up all of the salaries for the organization and then all of the benefits. And then it's the benefits divided by the salaries. And that gives you an average of what the fringe benefit rate. In other words, it may be that, 30% of, or 30% of is the benefits rate. In other words, the benefits to salary ratio.
Yeah. And I've seen, 28%, but it really, like Lori said, it's going to depend upon your organization. So we don't want to give you kind of like, this is what it is, but 28, 29, 30, somewhere in there we've seen, but definitely all salaries, all benefits, and then get that ratio. Yep. Thank you, Lori.
And then one other common question, I'm going to try to get to some of these and let you continue, but it's just about consultants and things. And you're actually getting ready to talk about that, about people who are not employees and how you account for them. So consultants or tutors or volunteers, and she's going to go into that. So we will we'll do that, and I'll try to answer some of these. Erin and I will try to field some of the other questions so you can continue on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
But estimating non-personnel costs, and yes, the same thing comes for me. It comes to mind for me when you're thinking about a lot of what our nonprofits do, and you're kind of like, but wait, we have tutors and we have consultants and all those things. And for my project in particular, we had 3 or 4 consultants. So that did come to mind for me as well. And they are non-personnel costs because these folks do not work, particularly here with Candid. They didn't work for Candid, definitely not getting benefits or a salary from Candid. So when it came to consultants, it was whatever I was paying them, right? So if we're saying, okay, this person's coming in and we're going to pay them $5,000 to do 3 weeks of whatever it is, that's what it is. So that would be their entire expense for a consultant. So every project's a little different. And so all the projects, the budgets would look a little different, but this is, a sample on the screen of what you might have and what you might be thinking about for non-personnel costs. So we have consultants, we have all of the supplies and materials, printing, postage, that sounds old now, but I'm sure people still do that. Travel, food, beverage, program equipment, the space that you're going to rent, program evaluation after, whatever that's going to cost. Maybe you have a SurveyMonkey subscription, whatever it is. But those are the things that you'll be thinking about. And of course, again, this is not exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive list. So you may have other things. So who are the people that are working on this project? And we're pointing to consultants that are not salaried. And that would include, if you have tutors and they're not kind of on staff, you get them from the local college, you get them from, whatever it is, then that's who you're thinking about. Also, if your project includes volunteers, because I feel like most of us have volunteers if you're talking about nonprofits, then you really want to make sure they are accounted for as well. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but just keep that in mind that yes, volunteers are going to go in there. The other thing that we wanted to point out was travel. That could include a lot of things. Like you're thinking, well, I'm not really going anywhere, but depending on what your project needs, you may have gas, you may have mileage, you may actually travel and have airplane tickets, hotels, food, all of those things. And we know those add up. So you want to make sure that those are in there. And that's just, again, a list that you can start with, but think about what you have. And I know we have some other examples and different things that we'll give to you that have even more than this on there. So when you add the personnel total and the non-personnel total, you have the total sum of your direct costs. So you're almost done with the expensive sides of things. But don't forget to add a line for indirect costs, and those are your overhead. So that's what we'll talk about a little bit more in detail. So indirect costs, what do you mean? This is a very big conversation with nonprofits. What are indirect costs? Well, they're the costs of doing business. They're the costs that they're not directly attributable to that project, but are necessary to sustain the project, right? So your administrative costs, right? Your rent, your utilities, your telephone, your internet, office supplies, marketing communication, admin staff, even your fundraising staff, all of those things, these operating costs that a lot of times we talk about, these are the ones that feel like, they're hidden costs. They're not something that you see, but obviously you can't get anything done without them. So there's the visible costs, the direct costs, what we were just talking about. So the people that you see and the thing that's happening, and you can actually see, the volunteers are there, all of those things. But obviously those hidden costs is what keeps the organization's doors open and for you to be doing this at all, right? Some grant makers don't fund indirect costs. We talk a lot about that general support and how that's changing, and it's more positive now, and people understand that it's necessary in order to get anything done. But it can be tough because it's not the part that they see, right? It doesn't have the direct impact. They're not saying, oh, yes, I'm paying that salary. That makes sense. I'm paying for those trucks, that makes sense. I'm paying for the, the vans to bring the food, that makes sense. But they're not seeing some of these things. But this is when it's your job to kind of make sure they understand everything. So some grant makers do fund indirect costs, but may put a specific limit on how much they will fund and may only allow a specific percentage of overhead costs. So no matter what, you always have to follow those guidelines, those grant maker guidelines, but just make sure that you're letting them know and they're able to see what exactly you're spending in order to get everything done. Really important point, because I think when people first start out, and I know some people with like tiny nonprofits trying to do some work, and they're spending a lot of time trying to look like I'm very, I don't want a lot of money. I'm just trying to get this thing done. I'm like, nah, you want to show what it really costs. And you really, if you're doing this out of your house, there's a percentage that you can, if you have like an in-home office and things like that, there's a percentage of that when you look at the IRS that's saying, well, then you can take some of your utilities and claim them. So just keep in mind that nonprofit doesn't mean, for free that you should be struggling and suffering. It really means that you just need to, when you ask for help and support, that you're very clear about what it is that you need and for what.
Okay, Vaughn, let me stop again. Got some more questions. And I want to remind everyone that you can always upvote questions that you see in the Q&A, and that way we'll try to get to all of them. I also wanted to reiterate that we're talking about project budgets as it relates to a grant proposal. So it's not just a general budget. So when we're talking about the project or program that you'll be funding, and that's where it's just not a general budget. But one of the things that comes up, and has to do with how you work within your organization. Several people were curious about best practices for tracking spend down after you're awarded the grant, because as we said, the project is related to the grant. And they said only our finance department has access to spend down reports. So the program directors don't know what funds are available and what they need to spend soon. Is there a system that could help program directors track spend down?
I wonder in terms of if there's particular software or anything that people are using that they may want to talk about in chat or, recommend. But that sounds like definitely you want to have communication, and you want to make sure that the grant maker is going to ask questions. And if you're the person that's, submitting this budget or submitting the grant proposal, or that is in most direct contact, you should know those answers. And so let's make sure if, that's how your organization works, that they all understand, hey, we're going to have to work together and have these answers because, in 2 months, I have to report this. In 3 months, I have to report these things. And I have the relationship. We talk a lot about this in all of our classes, that these grant makers are not just, some ominous cloud in the sky. They are a relationship, and they want to be able to communicate with you. You want to be able to communicate with them. So make sure that within your organization, you're covered and you know exactly what you need to report. And you make those systems something that works in your organization.
Okay. Another question, this came in a variety of forms. It's about salaries and sort of splitting salaries between multiple grants. So, depending on, maybe the ED is spending 10% on that project or 10% on this project, or maybe, their salary is already funded in some way. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, so that does happen. Math wise, it's kind of like, okay, remember, you're trying to get this program or this project to be funded, or for it to work. So for it to work, if there's 10% of the salary that, that $6,000 that's going in, it doesn't necessarily mean it goes directly to the salary, if that makes sense. It goes to the project, and that's the time they're spending. So yes, your salary will be kind of split up amongst projects, if that's what it looks like. And at the end of the day, your organizational budget, kind of that larger budget, is saying, okay, this is going toward salary, this goes toward this project. So it could sound a little complicated, but yes, you will have things split up, but then your organization will figure out how to make sure that your ED or whoever it is has their complete salary and what is going toward all those different projects. All right, so indirect cost rate, just in case you didn't have a question, you might have one now. So the total sum of direct costs for all your programs, so this is what we already talked about, the direct costs. That total sum, if your organization has a youth leadership program, for instance, with a direct cost of $200,000 and a college prep program with a direct cost of $300,000, your total direct cost would be $500,000. So we're just figuring out how to calculate your indirect costs right now. So we're going back to those direct costs that we already know about, the personnel, non-personnel, all of those things, putting those together, and let's just say we have $500,000. And then you would take the indirect program costs, so the other things that you calculated that were not, the utilities, all of those different things. And if that's $100,000, what you would do is you would divide, in order to get your indirect cost rate, you would take the total indirect cost and divide that by the total direct cost. So in this case, it would be $100,000 divided by $500,000, and you would get 20%. So that's kind of nice math. So we wanted to make sure that it worked for you, but that would let you know the percentage of indirect, that's the indirect cost rate. So no matter what you come up with for everything together in this project, you would say, and then let me add 20% for our indirect costs rate. I hope that makes sense. I was a math teacher, so I know it can be tough, but essentially what you figured out for your project, you will now add 20% for your indirect cost rate. And that would give you your grand total. So the other side, I'm almost scared to go on, but the other side would be your income. So now that we've looked at expenses and everything that you know you're going to spend, we want to switch gears and consider the other half of the budget, and that's income. So this is what you actually have to spend, or what you know is coming in. So again, we're going to look back at our components of a project budget. You had the income of the grants and contributions, and then you have the earned income, so fees for services, sale of goods. Remember, your income makes up both your support and your revenue. So all of those things, anything coming in would be a part of that part of your budget. So just as you laid out the expenses for your project, you will also need to show your income as well. So again, yours might look a little different than that, particularly for different projects, but here's an example of how you could show your income. And you may not be receiving all of these types of incomes, and that's okay. So this may not look like what yours would look like. But grants and contributions, here you'll want to include any contributions you have received from local, and you have received, by the way, not waiting for, but that you've actually received from local, state, or federal governments, independent foundations, or corporate grants. These should be confirmed grants, like I just said, not pending requests. So I know with our project, we had sort of like a check coming in the mail, or, hey, you've been awarded this grant, it will be issued, dot, dot, dot. And those are the ones we included. So we have 10,000 coming from here. We have 5,000 in hand from here. We have 20,000 coming from here, but never the pending requests, never the, we're hoping to get, 40,000 from this organization. We never did that. And if you have pending requests and they want that kind of information, that's typically outlined or listed as a separate attachment to your budget. If you've received support from individuals, that could also be included under contributions, but it's not necessary to list each individual, just the total amount received, so they'll know what you get from individuals. You'll also want to include any support you may have received from federated giving programs, such as the United Way or combined federal campaign. In terms of earned income, it includes fee for services or sale of goods, ticket prices, anything, tuition, if that's something, subscribers, if you have subscribers. For example, here at Candid, our earned income comes from the sale of our fees paid for our classes and different webinars when we had those that were for a cost, and then our subscriptions to our databases. So that's something we include. Membership dues, some nonprofits charge for memberships, those kinds of things. And then what Lori mentioned already, in-kind support. In-kind, and I did a lot of this working in nonprofits over the years, those are gifts that are not monetary in nature, but they do have a monetary value. So a lot of times when you think about in-kind, you think about goods or products, equipments, and for me, I think about space a lot because I worked for a nonprofit where we did not have the space to hold our kids for the different things that we did. So every institution that we worked with, they would allow us their space. And so at a particular time of year, I'd say, hey, can you send, please let me know the cost had we rented that space. And they would send me like the in-kind letter, like, we've given this to this organization. It is worth this. They were here for, 5 hours on a Sunday or whatever it was. And this is what it would cost. And that was their in-kind contribution. But essentially, you want to show that someone has given you something for free. And I'll move my slides instead of just talking, sorry. When you add in-kind support, because it's donated, it should be shown as both an expense and as an income. So really important that they understand what the cost would be, because you may have to pay that at some point, right? So if this school had not given us this space, it would have cost us $600. So I need you to understand that it costs $600. So it goes back in that expenses. And then also it was given though. So I'll put it as $600 also in my income, so you can see that it zeroes out, but you understand what the cost was. Similar with volunteers. If your project includes volunteers, you can visit the Independent Sector's website. I think it's independentsector.org, volunteer time, to see the current national dollar value rate for volunteer time. So here you'll also find a map which will break down the dollar value for each state, because it does vary. So for example, the current national value of volunteer time maybe is $31.80, I think. And that's kind of an average. Like some people are like, wow, okay. We would have paid this tutor $15 an hour, not $31.80. But what's happening with volunteers is that you have all kinds of volunteers. So you may have a volunteer lawyer, you may have a volunteer accountant, you may have all kinds of volunteers. So this average is really, feels a little skewed, and it's because they're thinking about all the kinds of volunteers you could possibly have. So anyway, there is an average. And so if you have a volunteer that'll spend 10 hours on your project, you can put that person in your budget under income and expense for $318. Okay. So again, this is what you're trying to show is what kind of money you need and what kind of money you're getting. So if you say, hey, I have these volunteers, they would have made $1,000, but they're volunteering, so they are giving me $1,000. So you just want to, again, zero it out, put it in as something we're going to need $1,000, but hey, we got the $1,000 because these are volunteers. So just keep that in mind, that they do go onto the sheet, because if for some reason you can't have volunteers at a certain point, and we know that a lot of things happened during the pandemic, then you may actually need to pay for those. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, Yvonne. And as I said, we're going to wrap this up soon. I'm going to try to parse the rest of your questions for Yvonne momentarily. Oh, one more thing. The Federated Giving Program, Yvonne, would you explain what that is?
The questions about that. So it's just another program that actually gives, and sometimes people will ask for a grant for it, or their organizations qualify for it. So it's just another source of income in a way. So, like they mentioned United Way as well. So just think about any source of income, because sometimes you kind of think like, oh yeah, that thing. They give us, passes for the kids, like bus passes for the kids, or they give us, you have to think about all of those things, because again, if they didn't exist, you would need to pay for those things. So any kinds of programs like that, you need to think about.
Okay. Another in-kind question is that if we're getting a drastically reduced rental rate for space, should we include the difference between what we're paying and what we would pay were we not a nonprofit?
Yeah. If as long as you can get their in-kind, so I would always ask for an in-kind letter. So that way I could show on paper, hey, this is what they're giving us. So yeah, if you would normally pay 10,000 and you're paying, 4,000, then they're giving you 6. So then they need to say that, and then you'll be able to say, hey, this is the letter that says that.
Okay. Another question that's come up in various forms is about the costs for, say, a grant writer or your fundraising development people. Does that count as overhead, or is that all going to be part of the project budget? Say if you have a grant writer, or as I said, you have people who are working on fundraising, where do you account for that?
It's overhead if they are your fundraising department. They have salary and they work for your organization. But if they're a grant writer, then if they're working for this project, or they're sort of a consultant, but they give time to different projects, then you're making sure that you consider them in that non-personnel. So remember, anybody who gets benefits, that's when you have to think about them as more salaried, and they would be part of overhead because they do fundraising for just the organization. Hope that makes sense. You're the one I can't talk.
Yeah.
Anything else in
Okay.
that?
We're still kind of parsing through, but you can go on with your wrap up and then we'll get to some other ones.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so yes, wrapping up. So we've now covered the two halves of the budget, income and expenses, which sounds really simple, but was not that simple. So we're almost done. But before we go, we just have a few more tips for you. Because in addition to your project budget, there are other financial documents grant makers may ask you for. Each grant maker, again, is different. Unfortunately, they're working on that, but for now, they tend to be very different. So, but we often see them asking for the following. Your most recent audited financial statement, organization-wide budgets for recent years. So this is that bigger budget that's the whole entire organization, everybody's salary, all of the things. A list of supporters and other funding sources. So we're talking now all of these different all of this income that you've gotten, all of these grants and contributions, they may be looking for a bit more of that. An annual report, which a lot of you do already, so that's great. Your budget narrative, a brief description that may accompany a budget, which can be used to clarify specific line items, explain how the costs were estimated and or justified need for costs. Like we're talking about these in-kind letters, all of those things, that might be a part of your budget narrative. We received this, we have a great relationship with this, you know, it's more of an explanation. And then your 990 form. So these might be things that you need to add. And remember to include everything the grant maker asks for, but little of anything else. So they're already asking for enough. So don't decide to like, well, let me stick in some pictures of the kids and let me, you know, with the budget, you want to do exactly what they asked for and not much else. And obviously, if they have questions or if you feel like, hey, I don't have that thing, like they're asking for an annual report, that's not done yet, but we have, you know, this draft report or we have these other things, then go ahead and give a call. Again, you're starting a relationship here. So you want to be able to talk to someone and say, we don't have this exactly, but we have something else. A lot of times the financial audit, which is really expensive, is something that a very small nonprofit may not have. And some grant makers will accept a financial review, and that costs a lot less. So you can pick up the phone and just ask that question. To make this process a little easier when you're pressed for time as well, we suggest that you keep all the possible attachments in one place so they're easily accessible. This is sometimes called a document drawer. So all of the things you think may be coming up, you want to keep it in your document drawer. So all of the things that you can think of, and that way you have it accessible to you. And obviously at this point, it's probably not a drawer. It's more of an electronic folder where you keep these documents and they're saved in one place and they're ready to attach or print when you submit your proposal. And we suggest having them all saved as PDFs, but you may also want to keep hard copies of the documents as well, and have the most up-to-date versions on hand. Like I said, in-kind letters were kind of big at my organization because we got so much of our work got done because of those in-kind spaces. So we definitely had those ready to go all of the time. So budget considerations after the grant is approved, because hopefully you got it. Ooh, you want to definitely get the grants. Everything was accepted, let's say, and but you're not done. Unfortunately, you're not totally done with the budget yet. And this is what we talked about a little bit more. Your budget is something to be considered throughout the grant period. The budget becomes an essential project management tool as you implement your project. You'll observe and monitor how the grant is being spent. And yeah, that's huge. That's kind of like, your own life with your budget. Like, believe it or not, we're all supposed to have like this budget and we're spending it down and we're paying attention. I don't do that at all. But anyway, yeah, it would be nice when someone gives you support and they're kind of asking and you're saying this is what we needed it for, that you're able to show that and that you're paying attention and that you make sure that you have what you need. So remember, you're going to have to report back to the grant maker during the grant period and when the grant period has ended. They want to know what your actual costs versus your projected costs were, because remember, this was all an estimate anyway. Like, you're doing the best you can to say this is what we need, but it's ultimately still an estimate until the actuals come in. So you're going to have to say, hey, this is how it's going. It turns out they're not able to give us the space this year. So we're going to use this $3,000 that we didn't think we were going to use. And maybe other things will come in that you weren't expecting, but you have to have those conversations, those explanations, and pay attention so that you know. And many times funders will require that you explain any significant variances and kind of get approval. But just keep that in mind, because we know that things don't always go exactly how you might expect, and so do they. So that's okay. So the key takeaways. So hopefully you've learned a lot and or reinforce some of the things that you already know. You need to know your project thoroughly. So all of that kind of thinking, like, how does this work? How do we do this? How are we getting this done? You should have someone, or at least a few heads together, that can say, oh, okay, this is what we're getting done, and this is how we do it. Oh, y'all don't remember we get the meals from here. Oh, we always get vans from here. Like, someone has to know all of that stuff. Estimate all the direct costs. So those things that you know that you need, you have to be realistic about how much it's going to cost. And that's why you want to go into, well, let me actually get some estimates. Like, don't just sit there like, I think it's about, go out there in the world. I was just talking to my mom about how high all the costs are right now. And that it's really, I think we're all having these conversations. So especially now, if you haven't done something for a minute, you have got to find out how much it's going to cost you, because the costs are going up for those vendors, and that means the cost is going up for you. So definitely get estimates. Include a percentage for indirect costs. Don't forget that part. That little math that we did that came up to 20%, it might be different where you are, but definitely include it, because you don't want to end up with so much under budget that you just didn't do a great estimate of it. And then estimate all possible income. Again, we want to have a nice attitude about what we're going to get in. That it's great, but you want to make sure that it's what's actually coming in. So again, don't shortchange yourself when it comes to your budget. I think that some people feel like, well, I don't want to ask for too much, or will they look at me funny if it costs this much? No, what they're looking for is that you know what you're talking about. And you know it costs this because you've done the research, because you've done it before, and because you've taken everything into consideration. So don't think about, I hope they give it to me because it's less than what, I'm going to make this stretch and we're all going to go hungry trying to, do this on a shoestring budget. No, and no, and no. Make sure you get exactly what you need in order to get your project done. You're doing amazing work. You're doing great things. So, make sure you have the money to do it. And I'm ready for questions.
Okay, we have a few themes. One thing I wanted to note, a lot of people mentioned about government grants and stuff, and the government is a whole nother animal. You agree, Yvonne, in terms of what they say they will, they will, have specific things that they will or won't pay for. Private foundations do too, but the government is very specific about what they will do, and you kind of just have to comply. Would you agree with that, Yvonne?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're thinking about, they seem to have a lot of rules and a lot of different things. But again, like Lori said, it's kind of a different animal. But if you have some federal grants, and we were just, I mentioned it when we were talking about income, if you have those on lock, if you're having that for this project, then go ahead and say that's okay to make sure that's listed. But in terms of what they require, they're just going to take probably a lot. What I've heard is a lot more maybe paperwork and different things to get those grants. They tend to be, a lot of them are very big and can last for multiple years. So it's a good thing, but yeah, just pay very close attention to what exactly they need from you.
Okay. The other thing a lot of people have wondered is, how does this process vary if you're going for like a general operating support grant that's for the whole organization?
So if you think of it, so we're talking about a project in particular. If you want to kind of think about this as just general operating support, then you would kind of go back in our slides and just think about, well, what do just those indirect costs? So that's all we're talking about right now. They may want to know a little bit more about your projects and different things, but now we would be concentrating on the lights and the utilities and all of those things. And again, you want to also have a sort of a narrative that says, this is what we do in general. These are the different projects we have, but this is our concentration. So instead of talking about the project, you're talking more about what the organization does as a whole and all of the different things that you need in order to keep that going. So it's kind of reversing it. So I would say, look at what we have and think about it as sort of in the reverse and the bigger picture.
Okay. Another interesting question, especially in these times, is about home offices. What if your employees are working from home, or everybody's working from home in their home office? Can those office costs be part of the budget?
I don't know that it works for every, I just had to do this as a board member. The organization I'm a board member for, it's so tiny that our ED works from her home, but the home is the nonprofit. So it's not like, it's like Candid, for instance. I'm home right now. But for Candid, I don't think we think of Candid as everybody's, all the 200 people's homes. Candid is in New York City. So for the organization I'm working with, the reason she's able to do that is because that's where the organization is based. So that may be the difference. So the organization is based in her home. That's where all of everything that's kind of happening for that organization goes out of her home office. Versus, I do a little bit from my home, but I'm not going to claim that. If your organization is, I don't know if I want to say big enough or small enough, and a lot is happening from, like, if you actually have, I don't know, tutoring sessions in your house or whatever it is that you do, then you may want to look into kind of the laws around that or the IRS around that. But my understanding is where it's based is why she's getting that percentage of utilities and things paid.
Okay. Another common thing, and we talked about this, but in terms of, and everybody wants to know, what's the magic number for overhead percentage?
The magic number.
What's the magic number?
That's a question. I almost don't want to say this, but a question for the supporters, the funders. But I've heard anywhere from 28 to 35. So there's no. The magic number is what it actually costs at your organization. Like, you shouldn't be looking for some like a thing that makes people happy. That's what it is. If people, the whole overhead myth, if they feel like you're doing too much, like you're paying too much for lights, like what? Like I cannot help that. It is what it is. If we want good work done and people to be paid and all of those things, you don't need to be broke just because you're doing good. So there is no magic number. It really is going to be a matter of what is the actual number, and are you efficiently using what you're bringing in and what's being contributed. We shouldn't be looking to make things lower. You know what I mean? And I think as a sector, if organizations can justify what they're doing, and we start to see, you know what, the number is 32. It just is. That's just what it is right now because of what things cost. Then no one's looking for the cheapest one. Like, I'm only going to fund the one that's 25. So I think it just is the actual number, and you have to calculate that and make sure you're using your money wisely.
All right. One other thing, can you speak a little on how to develop a strong budget narrative in the grant narrative? How do you explain, how do you begin, and what information should we include?
Your budget narrative is essentially when you're looking at the budget, so just the numbers in the list, it's explaining that, right? So if your personnel, for instance, your ED has expertise in a particular field, that, a PhD, whatever it is that they have, and you're kind of, they see the salary and they see the percentage of time. Well, this director is spending this much time because they have a psychology degree, and what they contribute to our project is blank. So now I'm getting a full sense of, okay, this $6,000 is quite worth it because this person, is related to this project in this way. We use this particular woman-owned bakery. That's the only place where we get our, whatever it is. So it's your opportunity to give a little bit more life to what is just numbers in a list. Especially if you feel like a number looks, I don't know, low or high, or just, I just don't know what this is. So it's nice to get a sense, like I said, with with the organization I worked with, because we did all of our work at the different schools that we worked with, that showed that we had really great relationships. And so for these schools to host us, and I mean, literally, we did everything at a different school. We had no space. That was like a nice thing for our funders. Like, oh, look at that. Oh, you work with this school and that school, and they just let you use really all this time. And so it was nice to name those schools and name those spaces, and even say, they gave us this and they fed the kids that day and they like for us to come around, So obviously you're not going to write a whole bunch, but you want to give a sense of when I look at a number and I look at a list, now I can look to see how that really works in practice. And again, with the budget narrative, if there's anything you feel like, oh, they might have a question about that, or that's kind of odd or different, let me make sure that I talk about that. It's also, I'll just add, a good idea to ask who you're working with. So whoever it is that you're sending this proposal to, ask them, what exactly would you need? What should my budget narrative look like? They may not even ask for one, but definitely find out, is there a word limit? All of those kinds of things, so that you're doing exactly what they need.
Okay. Have a number of questions that kind of refer to date ranges and things for a grant. So a grant request is usually for the grant. It's usually going to be granted for a specific time period. So one question was, should we prorate the confirmed grants for that range? Or another one is, if you have to select a start date for an ongoing program and you don't know the exact date funding will arrive, which date should you say? So just kind of about the parameters of, the project budget. Again, these are all related to grants. So
right. So now you're showing your income, and you're kind of concerned about, well, when is it coming in? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And someone said, like for a budget, is it going to be updated? The thing is, the budget is probably just for 1 year. That's the rule. It's not going to be for, even if you're going for a multiple year grant, they want to know what your annual costs are. So the budget, the time frame is typically going to be a year, correct?
Yes. And Lori said she wasn't going to be doing all this work, but listen to the answers. Thank you. Yes.
I know. We've had tons and tons of questions, and I'm trying to get to as many as we can. Somebody asked about inflation, and it relates to that. Again, you don't know what inflation is going to be for the year. You can't put that necessarily into that budget.
Right. Absolutely. Keep it annual.
Mhm.
This is why there's a budget narrative, and this is why you want to be in communication, because you may have these very specific questions about,
Mhm.
hey, we have this coming in, and I'm not sure if it will be in by this time. Should I still put it on here? You know, all of those things you
Mhm.
can talk to the grant maker as well about.
Right. And some of you, I've been answering some of them offline. So look in the Q&A. If you feel like you haven't got your question answered, look in the Q&A and see if me or Aaron, I had already provided an answer for you. But yeah, again, a lot of this stuff, the budget, it's good for a year. The next year, everything probably changes.
Yep.
So.
And not only is it just good for a year, but again, remember, you're having conversations throughout the year and check-ins to say, ooh, this is not exactly going, like we're trending toward zero faster than I thought, or wow, we have a lot more than what we thought, which, you know, I remember this from being in nonprofits all the time, like we better spend this money because they gave us this and we said we needed this, and we don't want them to think, you know, we overestimated so much and what's different. Like, let's try to figure out what exactly where that changed, you know, so you're kind of monitoring that and seeing what it is. And then you would figure out like, oh, okay, so we did this a little different. Maybe we were really skimping on meals and the kids are still like, well, why do I only get this? And now we can make sure, you know, we were being a little scared about spending, and now we can spend. So yeah, it's not just annual, it's kind of throughout that you're figuring out your budget.
Mhm.
Anything else in
And
there?
someone wanted to know about using a grant to pay for items to back pay for items. Yeah, that's a no-no.
Lori's like, I can answer that right now.
Yeah,
We're being
that's
recorded. No, don't do that.
yes, yeah, no, it has to be expenses that you are incurring annually or about to incur. You can't go back to the previous year and what you needed for that. Someone else, expenses, can you add a lump sum for contingencies? And
Can you
what
add
percent is appropriate? Yeah.
contingencies? That would be a great question to ask them. And if there is kind of like a formula, that's not something we talk about, the contingency formula or something, but you can look that up and see if it's something, because we know what contingencies can, you know, we understand that there have been all kinds of things that have happened. And if your organization has figured that out, hey, it turns out this happened and we were able to do this, and this is a formula that we figured out, that would be a great thing to ask a question about and show that you figured out what that means for your organization. So that would be a very budget narrative, you know, ask the question and then that would be in a budget narrative for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the last one, but on that point also, this is why, as Yvonne said, it's important. Don't sell yourself short in the budget. Don't underestimate, because yeah, you do need something to account for contingency. So don't go lower. You know, you want to be
Right.
accurate in your estimates. You don't want to overestimate, but you don't want to go too low either, because yes, as we know, there will be contingencies. And this is where your relationship with the funder comes in and discussing things that may come up later. Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And I did put on the screen a couple of classes that we have as well that you may want to follow up with that are for free here with Candid. And thank you so much again for being with us today. We appreciate you and we hope to see you at another time.